The Lian LI Lancool 215 is a mid-tower ATX case with an MSRP of $85 US. Let's take a closer look. What's up everyone, Eric here, and welcome to Hardware for Gamers. Now before I get into the overview, I do buy all the products that I review myself, so if you like what I'm doing here, can you please give a like and subscribe? It helps out the channel a lot. And speaking of helping out the channel, I also have an Amazon Associates link, so if you click on the link in the description and then add something to cart and order it, the channel will get a small kickback. Now with all that out of the way, the dimensions of the 215 are 48.5 centimeters high by 21.5 centimeters wide by 46.5 centimeters deep. The Lancool 215 does come with a small bag with all the screws and fittings in it. There's also some zip ties there. There is a folded booklet that is the user guide and or manual. This booklet is double-sided and illustrates pretty much everything you need to know about the case. The 215 has a fine metal mesh front panel. This panel can be easily removed by pulling the bottom of the panel away from the chassis. The front I/O is on the top of the case, so there is no need to worry about damaging any of the cables by doing this. Taking a closer look at the panel, there is no additional dust filter on the panel, so the fine mesh is the dust filter. Moving to the top of the case, we see the front I/O. There is a combo port for the audio out and microphone. There are two USB 3.0 Type A ports, a LED button, as well as a restart and power button. There is also a large magnetic dust filter along the top of the case. Moving to the rear of the case, we see the location of the rear I/O and a 120mm pre-installed exhaust fan. There are 7 horizontal expansion slots, all with reusable covers. Now if you remove all the expansion slot covers, you are left with a big hole in the rear of the case, and that's because Lian LI does sell a vertical GPU kit, but that is an extra $56 US. And finally at the bottom, we see the power supply location. Taking a look at the bottom of the case now, there are 4 plastic feet. All these feet have rubber pads on them to help stop the case from sliding around. There is also a removable dust filter that runs the depth of the case. This dust filter can be accessed from the front or rear of the case, but to access the filter from the front of the case, you will need to remove the front panel, which if you're cleaning the bottom filter, you're likely going to be cleaning the front panel as well. So there is a certain kind of sense to having it like this. Now there really is only 10mm given for ventilation of the power supply, and this is because of the rails of the dust filter. Now this shouldn't be much of an issue if you're putting the system on a desk, but if you're putting the system on a floor and that floor is carpeted, this will likely cause some intake issues for the power supply. Moving on to the right side panel, it is steel, and to remove the right side panel you need to undo the 2 cap thumb screws at the rear of the case, then slide the panel back and lift it away. The right side panel does feel pretty flimsy, but it should work well enough. Now the left side panel is tempered glass, and to remove the left side panel is similar to the right side panel. Undo the 2 captain thumb screws at the rear of the case, then slide the panel back and lift it away. Now taking a look at the inside of the case, there is a basement, and the top of the shroud has the same honeycomb ventilation as the rest of the case. These ventilation holes should allow the GPU to access more air, but we'll see how that all works out in the testing. The shroud also has 2 large cutouts for running cables. Now the shroud does extend the entire depth of the case along the side, but along the top of the shroud there is an opening at the front, and this is to allow for a 360mm radiator. Now taking a look at the motherboard tray, there are 2 grommeted cutouts along the top for your EPS cable and fan connectors, but most of your cables will be running through the 2 vertical cutouts, which also have grommets. Now the Lancool 215 does support mini ITX, micro ATX, and ATX motherboards. Lian LI says there is also support for eATX motherboards up to 280mm in length, but the eATX form factor is a weird thing, so your results may vary. The maximum GPU length is 370mm, but that will be cut down if you go with the front mounted radiator, and the max CPU cooler height is 166mm. Turning the case around to look at the back side of the case, there are 2 2.5-inch drive sleds. There are also a few cable tie-offs on the backside of the motherboard tray. Lian LI also provides 3 Velcro straps to help with cable management. There is also an ARGB fan hub, and there is also 22mm given behind the motherboard tray for cables. Moving on to the basement, there is a drive cage. This drive cage is designed to hold a 3.5-inch drive, but it is possible to install a second 3.5-inch drive or even a 2.5-inch drive on the top of the cage. But FYI, if you do plan to use the drive cage, you will need to install the top drive first before installing the drive into the cage. So this means you can have up to 4 drives in this case. In its stock orientation, there is 230mm given for the power supply and cables. Now this drive cage can be moved or removed. To remove the drive cage, all you need to do is slide the drive cage towards the right side of the case and then lift it away. To reinstall the drive cage, align the grooves on the bottom of the drive cage to the grooves on the basement floor, then slide the drive cage in. Now with the drive cage in the front position, there is 260mm given for the power supply and cables. Now if you have the drive cage in this position, you will no longer be able to have a 360mm radiator. Now if you remove the drive cage completely, there will be just under 400mm for the power supply and cables. Now that will be cut down if you go with a 360mm radiator. Moving on to the cooling for the Lancool 215. There are 3 fans pre-installed. There are 2 200mm ARGB intake fans at the front and 1 120mm exhaust fan at the rear. Now the Lancool 215 can support up to 6 120mm fans, so that's 3 fans at the front, 2 fans along the top, with 1 fan at the rear. Now if you prefer to have 140mm fans, then you can have up to 4 140mm and 1 120mm fan. So that's 2 140mm at the front, 2 140mm along the top, with the rear still being a 120mm fan. Now for radiator support, you can have up to a 360 or a 280 at the front, and along the top you can have a 280 or a 240mm. Okay, that's the overview. Now it's time to actually build in the case and then do some testing. Okay, so I have ran all the tests, but before I get into that, I wanted to talk about the ARGB Fan HUB. The hub only works with 3-pin fans and is powered via SATA, which means you have no control over the speed of the fans, so they are running at 100% of the time. Now for the ARGB LED side of the hub only works with 3-pin 5V ARGB LEDs, so 4-pin 12V LEDs are not compatible. The hub has 7 built-in colors, with 5 different lighting effects. Now you can add extra LEDs to the system by using the extender connector. However, if you want to add multiple LEDs, you will need to buy a 3-pin 5V ARGB splitter. There is also a connector on the hub that lets you plug into the motherboard to allow the motherboard to control them via the board manufacturer's software. To do this, you will need to plug in the 3-pin 5V header into the motherboard and then hold down the LED button that's on top of the case for 3 seconds, and that will switch everything over. And again, you will need the board manufacturer's LED software. Okay, time to go over all the testing, but before I show you the charts, if you do have any questions on how I test the cases, check out my case testing method video in the card above. I'll also have it linked in the description below, and that should answer most of your questions on how I test the cases. Starting off with the CPU testing, with the pre-installed fans running off the motherboard, the Lancool 215 had a max CPU temperature reach 55.1 Celsius. By adding a top exhaust fan, brought the max CPU temperature to 55 Celsius, so there wasn't really any difference. Then in the fan normalized test, the max CPU temperature dropped to 53.5 Celsius. Now when using the pre-installed fans connected to the hub, as I said before, this is then having the fans run at 100% of the time, had the max CPU temperature at 52.5 Celsius. Now in the fan normalized test, when I removed the front panel and dust filters, the max CPU temperature hit 52.1 Celsius, which then indicates that the front panel and dust filters are not restricting the airflow to the CPU in any meaningful way. Now when comparing the stock CPU temperatures to the other cases I've tested, the 215 did very well with and without the fan hub. Then when comparing the CPU temperatures in the fan normalized test, the Lancool 215 performed pretty well, landing in between the 4000D airflow and the P300A. Now onto the GPU testing, and this is where things get pretty ridiculous. The Lancool 215 in the fan normalized test had the max GPU temperature at 55 Celsius. The next test is the fan normalized test with no fan or filters, and this had the max GPU temperature at 52.4 Celsius. Now all the tests using the stock fans were within the margin of error of one another, which means those 200mm fans give no Fs. Now when comparing the GPU temperature of the Lancool 215 to the other cases I've tested, its stock configuration performed very well, which has it as the new chart topper by a lot. So yeah. And in the fan normalized test, it performed well, landing in the middle of the pack. So what do I think of Lian Li's Lancool 215? For the $85 US, the build quality is really quite good. The case can hold up to 4 drives, which is nice to see. Now Lian Li doesn't give color options for this case, which is a little disappointing. Now I do have some minor issues with this case, starting with the cable management, or more specifically the Velcro straps, and where they're located. Having them on top of the grommets didn't work for my OCD. They should be to the right or left of the grommets so that you can actually get the cables into the grommets easily. Now I did relocate them and it did seem to work well enough, but the thing is I shouldn't really have to do that. Now I also didn't like that there is no hold on the tempered glass, so when you're taking off the glass panel, you're getting fingerprints all over it. Now the right side panel does have a hold, but the glass panel doesn't. I don't really get that. Now when it comes to the temperature testing, those 200mm fans do a ridiculously good job. Now I would recommend not using the fan connectors on the hub, rather connect the fans to the motherboard so you actually have control over the speed of the fans. And just use the hub for the RGB part. Well, that's all I got for this one. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. And if you're still watching, please hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified whenever I drop a new video. Please follow me on Twitter at HFG_YT. I also have a Discord server. The link is in the description below. And as always, thank you for watching and see you next time.